Merry Meet, Annie here. I'm going to make my first video about the questions that people have sent me. You know, if you haven't considered doing this, it's been very interesting. Now, as history, in case you don't know what this is about, I put out a video asking people to ask me questions. Stole the idea completely from other people who have done the same thing. And it's been interesting, the variety of questions that have come in. And those of you who haven't tried this yet, give it a go. It's very interesting. Now here's how I have decided to handle it. I'm only going to do a few at a time so that these don't become these long, endless videos. And I do tend to ramble on, so I'm trying to not have this be about that. I'm also not giving any thought to these in advance. I am collecting them as people send them to me and not intentionally like thinking or planning what I'm going to say, because I think the beauty of these is it catches us with what comes out, what our inspiration is, the thought of the moment, and keeping it brief. And I do have a couple that I think I will actually make actual videos where I tend to them in a little bit longer fashion. So that's going to be interesting coming out of this too, some ideas of videos. One of the assumptions that I make is that there are so many things that have been done to death on YouTube, which is me thinking that by looking at what's out there. And I don't stop to think that who we watch, how long we spend watching, who we want to ask a certain question of, and even if it's a question we have asked or seen 100 responses on, we're interested in the one more response. So a little bit I learned about this is some of the questions I got to me were like, you know, the kind of thing that's been answered over and over again, and I never would have thought about addressing them. But I'm thinking about that a little bit differently now and appreciating that it's not always about how many times something's been asked at the mass level, but it's just someone wants to know what it is for someone else. So that's an interesting take I had on this. So let me get a few of these done so we can see how this goes. This one came from Conjo22. I would like to know, if you have children, if you do they also follow a Wiccan pagan path? I do not have children. I have raised a stepchild, but I do not have children of my own, and unfortunately, my stepson, who I raised when he was 2 to 10, his dad and I did divorce, and it was a friendly divorce, but we went enough of a different direction that our lives kind of went a different direction, and we did kind of lose touch. So I'm not the expert on raising pagan children. The one time I had a child in my life for those 8 years, we made an intentional decision. We sat down and talked about how to handle it. His dad was not pagan, but his dad was very open-minded. And we made a decision that we did not want to overlay on that child a specific spiritual path, no more than we would have wanted that when we were being brought up. We wanted our child to have the freedom to be exploring and finding out who they were. Now, we did realize that the danger of being that free-spirited when it came to raising children was some of what we learn as children growing into adults is first being able to fall back on a foundation of faith that we receive from our parents and our community that allows us to get through challenging and difficult times. And if a child is left out there finding their own way, they don't have that. We felt very strongly that there should be enough structure to what God might be and celebrating through the year, but we did not make it specifically Wiccan. And I personally would not choose that for a child. Coming from a traditional Wiccan background, children are very much part of our communities, and for every one of our gatherings there would be something done for the children, and then the adults would go off to do something, in my case, very traditional. And when a child came of age and wanted to be taught by an elder in the community or consider taking on the specific religion of Wicca, the community was there to support them. But the focus on the growing up years of the child was that God is there in whatever form you reach out to him or her, and a love of nature and a feeling of being part and loved by the wider community, not just your family, but those who were in the wider community your family was part of. So that is how I chose and would choose to bring up a child in this world. They don't need our labels. They don't need to be given our religion, is my point of view on that. They also don't need to be abandoned to make their own way. I think there has to be some kind of foundation of the idea of spirit moving through their life without the specifics of traditional religion of some form, including Wicca. A similar question to this actually came in from Claire Loves Wicca. And she added to the question that in addition to how we raised any children that were in our life, were they pagan in later life? And I wanted to put a little addendum in, since I mentioned that I was very, very involved in the spiritual upbringing of my stepson from 2 years to 10 years old, in that my contact with him later in life was that those formative years of him being encouraged to think and question and, as he put it, experience God, became a very important part of who he became as a spiritual man. Christianity did speak in the end very strongly to him, and he is a very devout and happy, loving, amazing Christian man. And his comment about his upbringing and my influence, which I thought was one of those ultimate compliments you receive in life where something stands out and you're just bowled over that you could have made that kind of impression on somebody, is that he felt very strongly that he chose Christianity, that it was not chosen for him, that amongst all the experiences that he had during the time I was influential on his life, that he believes he came to that religion. He described it as coming home the same way I describe coming home to paganism in my late teens. So I can appreciate that. And in that one instance, the fact that his father and I did not want to create an environment where we stamped him as you will be this or you will be that, that we did what we hoped to do, which create an environment in which he found his way to what spoke to him. So Claire, I did want to mention to you that in that case, the end result was a very, very devout and loving Christian. And he did mention to me also that through the experiences of his childhood under my influence, that he is a lover of the night sky and a lover of the noonday sun. And I thought that was beautiful that he put it that way. So there were obviously influences that lived on him throughout his life. It brings me great joy to know that he found the path that suited him, and that I hope that his father and I were guided, we felt we were, to providing the fertile ground from which he found his own way. So thanks you for your question too. Kanjo goes on to ask, how did your siblings, parents, friends, and any other members of your family respond to finding out that you are a witch, Wiccan, a pagan? I left home very young and have lived very independently from my family since that time. I was able to live my spirituality privately. It would not have been accepted by my family in the years that I was growing up, or even in my young adult years. It's not the drama that it is for some people, because I actually lived quite separately from them. And it was never a challenge to me. That I've always felt that my spiritual beliefs were personal, that I would pick and choose who I shared what aspect of who I am. And while today, when you know me online as somebody who's very open, talking about who I am and actually living it rather publicly in the world, I still pick and choose who I tell what to, who I share what to. I only have one sibling who found out about the time I was 40 what I was, in a fun way, because a friend of his where he lives, actually the person who shoed his horses, was Wiccan. And in a conversation, my brother then was talking to me. Now, my brother, I live on opposite coasts of the United States from my family, so I don't see them on a regular basis. And I remember on a phone call, my brother said to me, the woman who takes care of our horses, I really think that you and she are so similar, and she calls herself this thing called Wiccan, and do you know what that is? And that led to a conversation where my brother and I talked about my religion. My parents are very elderly. They actually think it is strange enough that I am a Unitarian Universalist. They think that's a cult of some kind. It's never been a dramatic schism. There's never been a big ta-da about it. Once again, I left home so early I was free to pursue my own path. And when I still lived at home, I lived at home for, I guess, 5 years, from, say, 12 years on, that I knew that I didn't believe in the religion of my family, but I had no problem with exploring mythology and religions of the world and growing my relationship with nature and reading everything I could about nature. I was able to do all that within a construct of behaving appropriately within my family environment and respecting my parents. It is when I left home that I was able to get more involved in the specifics of a religion that was different than I was raised with. So I didn't have any problems at home because I lived when I was at home in respect of my parents, and also feeling very, very strongly I had the right to hold things privately that were intimately personal to me, and I didn't feel I had to share them. That's very different than what I see amongst so many of my young online friends who want to live the religion out and proud. And I'm all for that, except for, I do believe, when we are under the roof of our parents, they are the elders. They are the elders in our community. They are deserving of our respect. I don't believe that means we kowtow. I do believe it means that we are considerate of what we share. I also think that when we are young and still living at home, that to declare in the face of perhaps family stress, setting ourselves up against our own community, our schools, the people that we know in our lives, this is what I am and this is what I believe, and I'm a witch or I'm a Wiccan or I've taken this name and this is what I am. We can limit ourselves because the next day, the next month, the next year, you could feel very differently and be exploring a very, very different path. I don't like to see any young person box themselves in with a label. I find it limits us and it limits our potential for growth. So I, as a young person, chose to keep my private life private. And to this very day, while my parents honor that, I have a faith different than theirs. They have no connection to it as my being a Wiccan. They just know I don't believe as they believe. That's all they need. It's actually all they want to consider of who I am spiritually. That's just my personal circumstances and my relationship with my family. As far as other members of my family, I have a small family. I was never in a position stuck amongst 100 of my relatives feeling different and the odd child and then the odd woman out. I lived very independently from my family at a very early age. So my circumstances may be different than a lot of our viewers here are connected to. So this very first one that Conjo asked, this very first question, ended up being a video's worth, didn't it? So I'm going to be respectful of time, and when I have something like this that I say more than I thought I was going to say because I'm not planning these in advance, then I'm going to leave it at that and offer it up for consideration for those who have comments or questions. And thank you, Conjo, for having asked this question. I would put back out there to those of you who are watching my videos, if you are young people, think about all your options. Don't think it has to be one way or the other. Whether you are out and speaking about your beliefs or not is a personal decision. Because of my firm beliefs in the respect that we all owe the elders in our families, whether we are still living at home, whether we have moved away from home, it's a consideration I would ask young people to give to this. As much because of the limitations that might put back on you by the reactions that come back to you from your family, as it is, you have a right to privacy. You have a right to explore and redefine yourselves moment to moment. It is part of growing up and maturing and expanding. Think about whether you want to limit yourself by pronouncing I am this or I am that. Thank you again, Conjo, for this interesting question. I wish you all mirth and reverence. Merry part.